New developments are emerging in the 1996 murder of child beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey.
In the early hours after Christmas Day, 1996, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey appeared to vanish from one of the safest places imaginable, her own home. The first clue was extraordinary: a 3-page ransom note left inside the house, demanding exactly $118,000 for her return. Police began investigating a kidnapping, but JonBenét had never left the house. Hours later, her body was discovered in a basement room, inside the very home officers and others had already been searching. From that moment, the case became a mystery that would divide investigators, experts, and the public for decades. Was an intruder responsible? Or did the truth somehow lie within the Ramsey home? The ransom note, disputed physical evidence, conflicting interpretations of DNA, and crucial investigative mistakes would produce competing theories without a definitive resolution. Nearly 3 decades later, do the clues finally reveal what happened that night, or have they only made the mystery deeper? Before dawn on December 26, 1996, the Ramsey family home in Boulder, Colorado, became the center of a mystery that would never fully release its grip on America. According to the family's account, Patsy Ramsey came downstairs and discovered a lengthy handwritten ransom note on the back staircase. The message claimed that 6-year-old JonBenét had been taken by a foreign faction. The kidnappers demanded $118,000. That strangely precise figure would later attract enormous attention because it closely matched the amount of John Ramsey's recent bonus. Despite warnings in the note against contacting authorities, Patsy called 911.
Note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's blonde. 6 years old.
How long ago was it?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone.
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says FBTC. Victory.
Police arrived expecting a kidnapping, but almost immediately, the investigation became complicated. Family friends entered the home. People continued moving through the property. Areas that might contain evidence were not preserved with the control investigators would later wish had been established. Then the hours passed. The expected ransom call never came. Eventually, Detective Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey to search the house for anything unusual. John went into the basement. Inside a secluded room, he discovered JonBenét's body. In a matter of moments, everything changed. What officers had treated as a kidnapping was now a homicide investigation, and the house itself was the crime scene. Police had spent hours waiting for kidnappers to call, but the child they were searching for had been inside the house all along. Before she became the center of one of America's most debated unsolved homicide cases, JonBenét Ramsey was a 6-year-old child living with her family in Boulder, Colorado. She participated in child beauty pageants, an aspect of her life that would later dominate countless headlines and television reports. But the photographs and performances that became permanently associated with the case represented only one part of a young child's life. JonBenét lived with her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her older brother, Burke. The family was affluent and lived in a large residence in Boulder. John was a successful business executive, while Patsy had her own history in pageants, having competed when she was younger. Then came Christmas 1996. On Christmas Day, the Ramseys celebrated together before attending a gathering at the home of family friends. Later that evening, they returned to their house. What happened after that became the subject of extraordinary scrutiny. Over the years, investigators, journalists, attorneys, and independent researchers would examine statements about the family's movements, JonBenét's condition when they returned, and what each person did before going to sleep. Certain details would be interpreted differently depending on which theory of the crime someone believed. The house itself also became important. It was large, with multiple levels and a complicated layout that could make a complete search more difficult than it might initially appear. Below the main living areas was a basement containing several spaces, including the secluded room where JonBenét would eventually be found. That room would become central to one of the investigation's earliest and most consequential questions. How had she remained undiscovered for hours? Almost immediately, the Ramsey family's public image became inseparable from the investigation. The contrast was striking. One day, They appeared to be a successful family celebrating Christmas in an affluent Boulder neighborhood. The next morning, their daughter was dead inside their home. As national media descended on the case, the homicide transformed from a local investigation into a cultural obsession. Every photograph, interview, statement, and piece of evidence seemed to generate another argument. Eventually, two competing narratives came to dominate public discussion. One theory held that someone inside the home was responsible and that elements of the scene had been staged. The other argued that an unknown intruder entered the Ramsey residence, killed JonBenét, left the ransom note, and escaped. Neither theory has produced a universally accepted resolution, and both begin with the same missing period of time. Somewhere between the Ramsey family returning home on Christmas night and Patsy discovering the ransom note before dawn, something happened inside, or around, that house that investigators have spent decades trying to reconstruct. On Christmas night, 1996, the Ramsey family returned to their Boulder home after spending part of the evening at a gathering with friends. From there, the timeline becomes more complicated. According to the family's accounts, JonBenét was brought inside and put to bed. But details surrounding exactly what happened after the family returned home would later be examined repeatedly, with investigators scrutinizing statements and timelines as they attempted to reconstruct everyone's movements. What is certain is that, early the following morning, JonBenét was reported missing. According to Patsy Ramsey, she had come downstairs and discovered several handwritten pages on the back staircase. It was a ransom note, and almost everything about it was unusual. The message was approximately 3 pages long, far more elaborate than the brief instructions commonly associated with a kidnapping demand. Its author claimed to represent a small foreign faction and demanded exactly $118,000 for JonBenét's return. That amount would become one of the most discussed details in the case because it closely resembled John Ramsey's recent bonus. The note also contained warnings. The family was instructed not to contact police, with threats made about what would happen if the instructions were ignored. But Patsy called 911. At approximately 5:52 that morning, the emergency call brought Boulder police to the Ramsey residence. Initially, officers had every reason to approach the situation as a kidnapping. There was a missing 6-year-old child, a ransom demand, and a family reporting that their daughter had apparently been taken during the night. But the house was not secured in the way investigators would later wish it had been. Family friends arrived and remained inside. People moved through portions of the residence. Surfaces and rooms were exposed to continued activity at a time when no one yet understood that the home might contain the body of the victim and potentially the entire homicide scene. That early contamination would become one of the investigation's defining problems. Later, when detectives attempted to interpret physical evidence, they had to consider whether an item, trace, or disturbance was connected to the crime or simply resulted from the number of people moving through the house. Meanwhile, everyone waited. The ransom note suggested that further communication would come, but the expected call never arrived. Even the timing described in the note became a source of debate, with questions about whether its references applied to December 26th or the following day. The hours continued to pass. Eventually, Detective Linda Arndt asked John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White to search the house for anything unusual. The two men went downstairs. In the basement, John entered a secluded room. There, he found JonBenét. She had never been taken from the house. John carried his daughter upstairs, an understandable act from a grieving father's perspective, but one that further altered what investigators now realized was a potential crime scene. The kidnapping investigation instantly became a homicide investigation. Authorities ultimately classified JonBenét's death as a homicide. Strangulation was identified as the cause of death, while the autopsy also documented serious head trauma. Evidence associated with JonBenét and the basement would become the subject of years of analysis and disagreement. Items found near or connected to the scene, the location of her body, and the physical condition of different areas of the house would all be interpreted through competing theories. And the ransom note became even more mysterious. Investigators reportedly determined that materials used to write it were connected to items from inside the Ramsey residence. But that fact did not answer the most important question. Who wrote it? If this had truly begun as a kidnapping, why had JonBenét never been removed from the house? If an intruder had entered the residence, Why would that person apparently spend enough time inside to compose such an unusually long message? And if the ransom note had been staged, who created it? And what were they trying to make investigators believe? Possible entry points also became central to the intruder theory. Particular attention focused on a basement window and whether someone could have entered or exited through that area. Supporters of the intruder theory viewed aspects of the window as potentially significant. Others disputed whether the physical circumstances actually supported that interpretation. Like so much else in the case, the same details seemed capable of producing opposite conclusions. By the end of December 26th, police were no longer searching for a kidnapped child. They were trying to determine whether the answer had entered the Ramsey home that night or had already been there. Investigators now faced a homicide scene already complicated by hours of activity inside the Ramsey home. Because police had initially responded to a reported kidnapping, the residence had not been preserved as the controlled scene detectives would have wanted for a murder investigation. Family friends had entered. People had moved through rooms. JonBenét's body had been carried from the basement. That created a lasting problem. Investigators examining evidence would have to ask not only what they had found, but when it had been deposited, and whether it had any connection to the crime at all. At the center of everything was the ransom note. Its unusual length immediately attracted attention. Rather than a short demand, someone had written approximately 3 pages containing threats, instructions, and unusual language. Handwriting experts examined the document and compared writing samples from multiple individuals. Patsy Ramsey received particularly intense scrutiny. Some analysts reportedly believed she could not be definitively eliminated as the writer, while other interpretations were less suspicious. But disputed handwriting opinions do not establish authorship. No court has determined who wrote the note. Then there was the amount demanded, $118,000. The figure approximately matched a bonus John Ramsey had received. That coincidence created obvious questions. How would an outsider know that number? Was the similarity accidental? Or had the amount been selected by someone with knowledge of the family's finances? The house itself offered another disputed category of evidence. Investigators examined possible entry points, including a basement window that became central to arguments supporting an intruder theory. Some believed the window and surrounding circumstances showed a possible route into or out of the residence. Others questioned whether the physical evidence truly supported that scenario. Then came perhaps the most scientifically complicated evidence in the case: DNA. Unidentified genetic material recovered during the investigation became central to arguments that an unknown intruder was responsible for JonBenét's death. But the existence of unidentified DNA is not the same as identifying the killer. Boulder police have described the available DNA evidence as extremely small and complex. Questions surrounding the quantity, mixture, source, and significance of genetic material have created continuing forensic challenges. In 2008, Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacey sent the Ramsey family a letter stating that new DNA testing supported clearing members of the immediate family. For supporters of the intruder theory, the announcement was enormously significant. But the interpretation of that evidence, and whether it justified such a broad exoneration, was subsequently debated by other investigators, experts, and observers of the case. The DNA remained important. It simply did not provide a universally accepted answer. Other physical details became controversial as well. Unidentified marks, fibers, trace material, and objects associated with the basement have all appeared in competing theories. Yet interpretation has often depended on what investigators or analysts believed happened first. Over the years, authorities examined numerous suspects and leads. One of the most dramatic emerged in 2006, when John Mark Carr claimed responsibility for JonBenét's death. His statements generated international headlines. But the apparent breakthrough quickly collapsed. Authorities ultimately determined that the evidence did not support prosecuting Carr for the murder. His DNA reportedly did not match the unidentified profile considered relevant to the investigation, and significant questions emerged regarding his account. It was another example of a pattern that repeatedly complicated the case. A sensational claim would appear. Attention would shift. Then the evidence would fail to produce a resolution. At the same time, tension developed between Boulder police and the Ramsey family during the original investigation. The family criticized aspects of the police response and investigation, while investigators scrutinized those closest to JonBenét. Public suspicion soon became almost inseparable from the actual evidence. The Ramseys were analyzed on television, in newspapers, and eventually across the internet. Every statement and behavior became material for competing interpretations. But one legal fact remains essential. No member of the Ramsey family has been convicted or charged with JonBenét's murder. The 1999 grand jury proceedings added another complicated chapter. Years later, previously sealed documents revealed that grand jurors had voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on child abuse-related counts connected to allegations that they had permitted JonBenét to be placed in a dangerous situation and had assisted someone they knew had committed an offense. The district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, declined to prosecute, stating that the evidence was insufficient to proceed. The significance of those proposed charges continues to be debated. But a grand jury vote is not a conviction, nor does it establish who killed JonBenét. It reflects a determination that jurors believed probable cause existed for charges, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and not a final finding of responsibility for the homicide. Decades later, investigators are still confronting the same fundamental problem. The ransom note can be interpreted as evidence of an intruder or as possible staging. The basement window can suggest an entry route or raise further questions. The unidentified DNA can support the possibility that someone outside the family was present or create difficult questions about transfer, source, and forensic significance. Even the earliest mistakes matter because they complicate what can confidently be reconstructed. Almost every major clue appears capable of supporting one theory while creating problems for another. And that is why the evidence has never simply narrowed the mystery. In many ways, it has expanded it. The JonBenét Ramsey case has survived for decades because almost every apparent answer contains a contradiction. The first is the ransom note. A message describing a supposed kidnapping was discovered inside a home where the victim had apparently never left. The materials used to write the note were reportedly associated with the Ramsey residence. While its extraordinary length and unusual language remain unlike what many would expect from a conventional ransom demand. But those facts still do not identify its author. The second contradiction is the crime scene itself. Because police initially responded to a kidnapping, the house was not preserved from the beginning as a homicide scene. People moved through the residence, and JonBenét's body was moved after its discovery. As a result, some evidence must be interpreted against the possibility of contamination, making certain conclusions harder to establish with confidence. Then there is the DNA. Unidentified genetic material has long been used to support arguments that an unknown male may have been involved. Yet the forensic significance of that material remains disputed. Boulder authorities have emphasized that additional evidence is still required before the DNA can provide the breakthrough necessary to solve the murder. The fourth twist remained hidden from the public for years. The grand jury. Previously sealed records eventually revealed that jurors had voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on child abuse-related allegations. Prosecutors, however, declined to move forward, concluding that the available evidence was insufficient to prove the case. And critically, the grand jury did not determine who killed JonBenét. Then came confessions that seemed to promise answers. In 2006, John Mark Carr claimed responsibility for JonBenét's death, creating worldwide headlines. But his story demonstrated why a confession alone cannot substitute for evidence. Authorities ultimately concluded that forensic and other evidence did not support prosecuting him for the crime. These contradictions have produced several enduring theories. One argues that an unknown intruder entered the Ramsey home, killed JonBenét, and escaped. Another proposes that someone already inside the home was responsible. Outside commentators have also developed various staging scenarios intended to explain the ransom note and other unusual elements of the scene. But no theory has been proven in court. And over nearly 3 decades, documentaries, television specials, books, podcasts, and online communities have created another problem. The boundary between established evidence and entertainment-driven speculation has become increasingly difficult for casual observers to recognize. A disputed claim can be repeated until it sounds like fact. An interpretation can become a theory, and a theory can gradually become accepted as certainty by people who never see the underlying evidence. That may be the biggest hidden truth behind the enduring mystery of JonBenét Ramsey. The case does not survive because investigators have no clues. It survives because there are so many, and because the same ransom note, DNA evidence, crime scene details, and investigative decisions have been interpreted in radically different ways. Nearly 3 decades after JonBenét Ramsey was killed, her murder remains officially unsolved, and the investigation remains active. Patsy Ramsey died from cancer in 2006 without seeing her daughter's case resolved. John Ramsey, meanwhile, has continued publicly advocating for additional forensic testing of evidence preserved from the investigation. Advances in DNA technology have created renewed hope that old evidence might eventually reveal something investigators could not detect in 1996. But the existing genetic material presents technical limitations, and no single testing method can guarantee an answer. According to Boulder Police's 2025 update, investigators continued pursuing the case through new and repeat interviews, while collecting new evidence and testing and retesting existing material in an effort to generate additional leads. The scale of that investigation is extraordinary. Authorities say more than 21,000 tips have been reviewed, and investigators have interviewed or spoken with more than 1,000 people connected to potential information surrounding the case. A major cold case review has also examined the investigation and produced recommendations for investigators to consider. Authorities continue working with the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, prosecutors, and forensic laboratories as they evaluate evidence and possible investigative strategies. Some observers have placed hope in newer approaches such as advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy. But whether the available evidence is suitable for those methods, and whether such testing could identify JonBenét's killer, remains uncertain. No person has been convicted of her murder, and the fundamental questions remain exactly where they began. Who killed JonBenét? What was the real purpose of the ransom note? Was the unidentified DNA actually connected to the person responsible? And which pieces of evidence, after decades of competing interpretations, may have been misunderstood? For now, those answers remain hidden somewhere within an enormous investigative record. But evidence does not necessarily lose its value simply because time passes. Something preserved from that house in 1996 could still become meaningful as forensic technology evolves. And after nearly 30 years, that possibility is one reason this case remains open. Beyond the suspects, competing theories, documentaries, and decades of tabloid headlines, there is one fact that should never disappear beneath the mystery. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. Over time, the unanswered questions surrounding her death have sometimes become larger than the child at the center of them. Thousands of theories have accumulated, each offering a different interpretation of what happened inside the Ramsey home. But return to that house on the night after Christmas, and the mystery becomes hauntingly simple. Someone knew what happened. After nearly 30 years, separating evidence from assumption has only become more difficult. Memory changes. Stories are repeated. Speculation can gradually begin to resemble established fact. But solving a murder requires evidence, not simply the theory that sounds most convincing. Advances in forensic technology may still offer possibilities. They offer no guarantees. For nearly 30 years, people have studied the ransom note, the basement, the DNA, and every contradiction in between. But behind all those theories was a 6-year-old girl who went to sleep on Christmas night and never saw another morning. Until evidence finally identifies who took her life, the question that began inside that Boulder home will remain unanswered.